Hey folks, this is Charles Linden. So, the number one question, other than how can I overcome my anxiety condition, that we're asked by sufferers is why do I suffer from an anxiety disorder? And then they ask, why don't my brothers suffer? Why don't my sisters suffer? Why don't my parents suffer? Why do some people not seem to ever suffer? How can I protect myself from suffering? They're all legitimate questions. And the thing is, they're all on the basis of one problem, that we're sold a lie. The problem isn't anxiety, it's ignorance. Let me explain. If you suffer from an anxiety condition, it's not because granddad died or the dog got run over or you witnessed a war or some other catalyst that you've experienced in your life experiences. It's because you can suffer. So, what do I mean by that? I mean that there are a lot of people on this planet who can't suffer. You have to be born with the predisposition. There are so many examples in life of conditions, of illnesses that only arise in those that have a predisposition to suffering from them. Let me give you a good example. Let's talk about weight. Let's talk about physical size. Look, I'm quite a big guy. I come from a family of big people. Is that because we eat too much? No. Is it because we overindulge and we fast or we don't eat at regular times? No. Is it because we don't exercise enough? Most people are told that these things are absolutely influential in health and well-being and the size of your body, your muscle mass, and everything else associated with fitness. And of course, to a large extent, they are. But there's one factor that you cannot change. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you cannot change it. And that's your genetics. You're born what you are. Yes, okay, there's an argument that you can use stem cell treatments and genetic engineering to change who you are. And to a certain extent, you can. And as that technology is improving, there are ways that it will be able to influence who you are. But it doesn't change the core structure of who you are. Like I said in a previous live video, we are all an individual. As people, we are individuals that are born of two other people. And those two people are born of four people. And those people are born of 8, and those of 16, and so on. So very quickly, you've got this inverted pyramid of genetic information that is all fed into you. You're a mishmash of a huge quantity of genetic information, probably from all over the world, which is why when you have your genetics read by sending a blood sample to a laboratory to analyze it, your genetic information can come back and say that you've got elements from India or Africa or the Far East or South America. Genetics come in from everywhere. We don't know what happened 5, 6, 7, 8 generations ago with our ancestors. So we don't really know what we are until we get that genetic information. But one thing we can be certain of is that the unique you has a unique set of physiological and therefore neurological responses. Now, if you are preset, so if you have that predisposition to suffering from what most people call anxiety disorders, what I call fear disorder, because anxiety is disorder, so you can't have anxiety disorder. There's a nonsense in itself. For those people that are predisposed, like me, to have fear disorder, somewhere in that genetic mishmash of information came a structure into me that made me the person I am. Now, my parents are quite big people. So genetically, the chances were I was going to be quite a big person. So I have to fight my genetics through exercise and diet so I retain a healthy weight because my body, like many people's bodies, don't deal with incoming sustenance and fluids in the same way as other people's do. I tend to store more body fat despite eating a very healthy diet. And so I have to eat smaller quantities and exercise more to compensate. But it's that compensation that we learn that gives us so much power in life. When we learn to understand how our bodies and minds work, we have more power over how our bodies and minds respond to data, substances, and environments. It is absolutely vital that you understand that you don't suffer from an anxiety condition, fear disorder, OCD, panic disorder, agoraphobia, monophobia, health anxiety, eating disorders, emetophobia, and all of those conditions because of a catalyst that happened to you. That's not why you suffer. It was the catalyst, it was the activator of fear, but it's not the reason you suffer. The reason that you suffer is because you can, because you have that genetic predisposition to suffering. And therefore, anything that you try, other than the science itself, and I'll come back to that, anything that you try to rectify that isn't going to work. It's like saying, "Look, I'm overweight and I'm not fit enough." And you go to a gym and you speak to a personal trainer, and the personal trainer says to you, "Okay, I've got three options for you. Option one, I'll give you some medication, and when you take it, it'll suppress how you feel, so you'll tend to forget that you're overweight and unfit." So that's your first option. Your second option is that I'll give you some counseling, some therapy, some talking, some reassurance, so that that can help you to come to terms with how unfit or overweight you are. Or option three, I'll give you some exercise and a diet, and in 3 months' time, you're going to look thinner and feel fitter because you'll have you'll have scientifically changed your responses, your physical responses. We'll teach your heart and lungs to work more effectively together, to transit glucose and oxygen around your body. We'll teach your body to send protein to your muscles to build muscle mass and strength. Which option would you take? Would you take the medication to help you forget? Would you take the counselling to help you to come to terms with how unfit and overweight you are? Or would you take the exercise and diet? Now, there are a lot of people out there, as you know, that don't go to gyms. Even if they join, they just don't bother going. Why? Because they're lazy, because they just lack the motivation to go. And they know they should, but they just don't. So they just keep paying and don't turn up. So there are people that try and get option one and option two. They're the same people that take diet pills or have gastric bands fitted or and all those things. Of course, there are exceptions, and I accept that there are exceptions in that there are people that need to have those to save their lives, and in order for them to lose weight, to have other operations, for example. So I get that there are exceptions, but they're few and far between when you look at the entirety of the 8 billion people on the planet. So there are people that would opt for the medication to forget how unfit and fat they are. There are people that would potentially opt for counselling to come to terms with that. And there are people, of course, that just live with it, but they're not the people going to talk to a PT. The only option, as you know, scientifically, is to reduce your calorie intake and increase your calorie burning potential every day. Walking up and down the stairs, exercising, going on a treadmill is going to burn more calories and therefore stop you from storing as many calories. We all know this to be true. Many people ignore it. That's their choice. Like they ignore many things in life. They smoke despite knowing that smoking is bad. They don't exercise despite knowing that that's not good for them. So you make your own choices, but it doesn't change the rules. The core rules are the same. So, in the same way as you wouldn't take medication or get counseling for being overweight and unfit because you know the answer is exercise and diet, why would you do the same for a fear disorder? Because fear is a natural human response. When you're in emotional balance, you are, let's call it emotional fitness. Yeah. You're in systemic balance. Your endocrine system isn't producing too much of adrenaline. Your stomach isn't producing too much acid or becoming more acid because moisture is being taken away from it within anxiety, which would cause things like ulcerative colitis and IBS. So that goes into systemic balance. Your heart rate is normal because you're not having adrenal response. You're not having fight or flight. Your respiration has calmed down because you're not having to take in more oxygen to fuel the muscles preparing for fight or flight. So lack of emotional response, even if it's happiness or sadness or jealousy, is emotional balance. We should all be in emotional balance when we wake up in the morning. Then we should experience emotions and they should drop back down to normal levels. And that's what emotional balance is. That's what emotional wellness is. That's what mental health is. But the problem is, if you've got a predisposition to developing an anxiety condition, and one of these things happens in your life, the dog gets run over, granddad dies, or whatever, and it causes an emotional peak, in this case, fear, obviously, which is the most influential of all the emotions, if it is an emotion at all, which I've mentioned before. When it peaks, in people that don't have the predisposition to developing an anxiety condition, it drops back down. In those people that have that predisposition, potentially, not always, but potentially it goes up and it doesn't come all the way back down. It might go 60% of the way down or 90% of the way down, but they're left with a general feeling of unease. These are the people that go to war and get PTSD and then don't lead a normal life because they can't regain emotional balance. These are the people that witness, that experience loss or grief or change, and they don't go back to their normal level of fear response. These are the people that have a child and don't do the same. These are the people that have all of these influential things happen in their lives and don't go back to emotional balance. They are the people predisposed to developing an anxiety condition. And the reason they suffer isn't because of the death, of the grief, of the baby, it's because they're predisposed to having the condition. They can have anxiety. Whereas the majority of people, I say the majority, it's getting further towards 50% now, unfortunately. But the vast majority of people, up till 2 years ago, certainly, didn't have the ability to suffer from an anxiety condition. And if you get an anxiety condition and your fear is elevated and it doesn't drop back down to normal, it does what fear does. First thing that fear does is look for a threat. Your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin, your senses detect threat. So you're going to be in hypervigilance. That means your ears might ring. You might be sensitive to light. You may have sensory experiences on your skin because your senses are hugely sensitive, which means that in hypervigilance, when that doesn't drop back down to its normal level, you get these heightened sensory experiences. So that's the first thing that happens in fight or flight. What's the second thing that happens in fight or flight? Your body and brain produce a risk assessment. In your case, a what if. That's how you verbalize what you're experiencing. It's a risk assessment. Given the fact I've seen the tiger in the grass, what if it eats me? And what's the last stage? Activation of fear. If the tiger's there and if you deem it a threat to you, you activate what's commonly called fight or flight. Well, of course, that's the biggest misnomer in history, in the history of psychological practice, because all of these things, they don't conform to what psychology will tell you. They conform to basic human science, which of course psychology and psychiatry ignore in favor of the concept that you see a bear, think, then run, or see a tiger, think, then run. There's no thinking involved. So how's talking therapy ever going to help? Which is why it doesn't, which is why it fails, and why you're all being lied to about the actual truth about your anxiety condition. You have got what amounts to fear unfitness. You've got a disorder of fear. It's not a mental illness because it doesn't happen in here. It's not due to chemical imbalance because chemical imbalance cannot induce an anxiety condition. It's not due to psychosis or disturbed thoughts or disturbed ability to process information. It isn't sensory motor condition. What? It's lunacy that people even say this stuff, but they say it because they know that you're a captive audience that is desperate, that wants relief, and will listen to anything they say because they portray themselves to be learned. They're not learned at all. The stuff that they know about is theory. It's not science. Doctors know science. Now, psychiatrists that practice clinical psychology, presumably, in most cases, they know science because they've been to medical school, but they don't carry that medical science through to their psychiatric practice or into psychology, because the psychological practice that they practice is based on the notion that fear creates, or a catalyst creates a thought, and the thought creates physical response. It's just not true. You wire somebody's brain up to a computer and play out that scenario. You don't see that happen in the brain. It doesn't happen. If you had to think about every response you make, say, for example, I'm sat in front of you now and I throw a ball at your face. You don't know I'm going to do it. So there's no preconception of the risk. So I throw a ball at your face suddenly. Do you see the ball with your eyes, go, oh, look, a ball. I think I better bring my hand up to save my face? Or does your hand come up automatically? If you're driving along a road and a dog runs out in front of the car, you put your foot on the brake. It's autonomic. You don't think, oh, look, a dog, I think I better put my foot on the brake. Your foot's on the brake, your arm swings out to save the passenger next to you. Did you think about doing that stuff? No. There's no thought involved. So how is thinking-based therapy going to work? How is cognitive therapy going to work? And all of the other therapies that have been developed alongside those therapies within the same same perceived science. It's not science. It's theory. They found out a long time ago that that didn't work, which is why people suffer. So people don't suffer because they can't recover. They suffer because of ignorance. They don't understand the mechanics, the psychophysiology of their own condition. That's the first problem. The second thing is, even if they did understand that science, They wouldn't know how to use it in practice to assist themselves to recover from what they're suffering from. But most vitally, most people with these conditions will run to, at the very least, the internet to research and find a cognitive based therapy and find misinformation about the true nature of their disorder. Or they might go to a pharmacy, they might go to a naturopath, they might go to their GP, their doctor, their physiologist. They may end up with a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a counselor. They might end up with a psychiatrist, all of whom don't understand these conditions, don't use the science of these conditions in their practice models, and ultimately lead anybody listening to them down a dead end path because they don't understand what to say to you, which is why they then tell people that they're therapy resistant or drug resistant, or they're going to have to try another thing, some tree hugging or jumping up and down or tapping themselves. It's madness. There's one physiology in humans, the one that you've got, the one that I've got, every person on this planet has. There are some minute changes, obviously, between the genders, but also between various sectors of society that have predispositions to other physiological issues. For example, things like sickle cell anemia, or those things based on people's ethnicity. But other than that, we're all the same. We're like rock, a stick of rock. It's pink on the outside. You cut it through the middle, you got the same inside. It says human. And we're all human. There's one race. It's called the human race. We're all made the same genetically. Slight differences, yeah. But ultimately, we all respond in the same way. If you were to come to me and you were from Mongolia and you said, "Hey, Charles, I'm really hungry," would I hand you a glass of water because you're from Mongolia? No, I'd hand you food. If you were from, the Sudan and you came to me and you said, "I want to learn," would I tap you on the forehead? No, I'd hand you books to absorb knowledge. We all have exactly the same physiological responses to the same stuff. Yes, there are genetic things that can cause malfunctions in the way those happen. I'm not suggesting that's not true, but the blueprint for humanity is the same. So if you have an anxiety condition and you want to recover, you have to do what it takes to recover. You can't just do processes because somebody's been sat at a desk or in a psychological institute or a university reading through loads of books from 150 years ago, squirreling around for facts that they can bolster together into a new treatment methodology. I mean, tapping. Please, I ask you. You ask a physiologist, psychophysiologist, neurologist, whether doing this is going to change your deep preset autonomic responses in the part of your body and brain responsible for controlling the emotional responses, and also whether you can do this to change the responses of your adrenal glands that sit down here left and right next to your kidneys in your lower thoracic cavity, controlled only by neurological responses sent out by the amygdala in the brain. Tapping your hand can change that, please, or moving your eyes whilst thinking certain things. Come on. We all know it's not true because all know, sorry about the ringing, we all know it's not true because most of us have tried it and everybody knows it fails. Hypnosis. Sit there and be hypnotized to change your deep autonomic emotional responses. Come on. There's one science in absolutely all of us, the science that brings about recovery. It's undebatable. Look, I've helped 390 odd thousand people so far since 1997. And without exception, when people do what they're asked to do, it removes their anxiety condition completely, without exception, because it can't fail because they're human. But there are people for whom that doesn't sit well. Psychologists, psychiatrists who attack us as an organization because they know damn well that we spell out the difference and we show people why that stuff fails and why the truth wins. And they don't like it. There are people that will do our programs or buy our pros and not do them, in the same way as there are people that will join a gym and not go. I can't help people's laziness. I can't help why people feel uncompelled to do something. It could be because they're an alcoholic or because they've got an evil wife or a sick child or a gammy leg. I can't help that. What I can do is tell people the truth and hope that by hook or by crook, despite all of those things that could form barriers to their recovery, they'll do it anyway. Because when I recovered, I felt Horrendous. I was a housebound agoraphobic with panic disorder, eating disorders, health anxiety, emetophobia. I was a physical and mental wreck. I was huge. I was unfit. I could hardly walk without breathing, without being out of breath. And I went from that to well. I went from that to anxiety free in less than 3 days. And I went from that to being well again, balanced, a better weight, out and about, working, engaging, no anxiety, no phobias, no obsessions, no compulsions in, I'm going to say, 3 to 4 weeks. But my fear disorder was cured in 3 days. There was an adjustment process after that. But I didn't get on a plane and panic until I didn't. I got on a plane and I flew. I didn't go in a car and panic. I just got in the car and went. That's the difference. Disorder, order. It's like having diarrhea. Everybody needs a bowel movement. Nobody needs diarrhea. Diarrhea is the disordered version of an absolutely necessary human process, which is defecation. Just because you've got diarrhea doesn't mean you've got an illness. It means you've got a disorder caused by whatever. It could be a bacteria or a bug, or it could be anxiety itself, or it could be something else, fear. Um, and the point is, when you push that disorder back in, you go from disordered diarrhea to ordered bowel movement. And it's the same with anxiety. Anxiety is fear diarrhea. It's just disorder of a natural human response. And it can therefore be cured incredibly quickly as long as you go with the science. So all I ask people to do is listen to the science and do it. And without exception, therefore, they recover. Or you can just choose to believe I don't know what even you call it, the dogma, the lies, the manipulation, or the ignorance, or all of those things fed to you by people who just don't understand the condition. That's your decision. I hope you make the right decision. This is why we do what we do, and this is why I've stuck with it for 25 years, despite all of the evil it's brought to us from psychology and doctors and psychiatrists who have a vested interest in shutting us up. We're not going to shut up. Even if I'm gone, it's not going to shut up. It's just not going to shut up. The truth will out. Lots of love, guys. Take care. Thank you for listening to me.